Okay, let's get rolling. We're in chapter 16. I know spring break has probably erased everything that we knew about what was going on before spring break, but we were talking about medieval chant and about how it was monophonic and it was sacred. We also talked about how examples of music from this time period tend to be sacred in nature because the Catholic Church was the center of education and learning at that time. And the Catholic Church was kind of responsible for figuring out how we started writing down and preserving music. There was secular music, but it wasn't preserved because generally people who were performing that kind of music were doing it more for entertainment than for scholarship. And hi, Kira. And
Hi.
preserved because they didn't have the knowledge to write it down where it was transferable in written form. So today we're going to continue on. We're still in the Middle Ages, but we're moving forward in time. And we're going to talk about polyphonic music. Remember, polyphonic means more than one vocal line happening at the same time. If you remember back to our vocabulary, we had the Paw Paw Patch, and what was the other song? Skip to My Lou, thank you. I'm glad you remembered that. So now we're going to take existing chants that have been around for a while, and we're going to build on top of them, kind of like a Lego table, and we're going to add some lines to create harmony, to create polyphony. So polyphonic is the combining of two or more simultaneous melodic lines. We know that from before. And notated polyphony started toward the end of the Romanesque era, which is right around the fall of the Roman Empire, 850 to 1150. So this is pretty far back. And remember, we were in the process of developing our system of writing down music, of notation system, but it was kind of a work in progress. We didn't have all the details worked out. It doesn't really look like what we use today. It used the shaped neumes that were more like rectangular. Sometimes they had a stem, sometimes they didn't. And all of that meant something to the people who were reading it at the time. To us, it just looks beautiful and we don't really get it all the time. But the system of notation was on its way, and we were working on that. During the Gothic era, that's when we built a lot of really large cathedrals, including the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, where our story today is sort of set. The earliest polyphonic music was called organum. The bottom layer was existing plain chant. They would take an existing plain chant and they would add some voices on top of that to create the harmony. This was developed at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, my favorite cathedral in the world. And this was during the 12th and 13th centuries. One of the first composers of polyphonic music was Leonie. Now, there were probably some others, but we don't know their names because often composers at this time did not sign their compositions. They would sign it in soli Deo Gloria, which means to God alone be the glory. And so they didn't give themselves credit for their work. But Leonie did. He would sign his work, so we know his name. And he's credited with compiling one of the first large-scale works that kind of organized and brought together all this organum, called the Great Book of Organum, Magnus Liber Organi, which laid out music according to the church year. Many hymnals today are still laid out that way. I work for the Presbyterian Church, and the hymnal that we use is very much laid out that way. It starts with the Advent season and works its way through the rest of the church year through Pentecost, I think, is the last major thing. And then it has, miscellaneous hymns and psalms and things in there too. But it's laid out for use in the church year. His successor was Paratine. And he increased the voice parts from 3 to 4. To the medieval mind, the new had to be founded on the old. So that's why they used existing plain chant as the basis of the new polyphonic music. It already existed, it was established, so they could use the lower voice sang the fixed melody in very long, kind of droning notes. And then the upper voices would move with much greater fluidity. They were often very melismatic in character. The one we're going to listen to here in just a minute is very much like that. The lower voice sings what can almost be a one-note drone for a very long period of time, while the upper voices move with a lot of flexibility. So the first organ we're going to hear is Gaude Maria Virgo, which means rejoice, Virgin Mary. Virgo, Virgin, Maria, Mary, Gaude, rejoice. And it features 2 voices in rhythmic mode, which is a fixed pattern of long and short notes. Kind of like an ostinato that we talked about during our vocabulary time. Remember, an ostinato is a pattern that repeats. And the rhythmic mode was kind of an ostinato in its day. It had a fixed period of long and short notes, and it's repeated or varied, while the bottom voice has that sustained drone tone. This setting is in the style of Perotin. We don't know for sure that he wrote it, but it's his style. And it's very melismatic. Remember, melismatic means you take one syllable or word and you put a lot of notes over the top of it. You really stretch out that word or syllable. And this really, really does. This form alternates polyphony with monophonic chant. So there will be a section where everyone sings the same thing at the same time. And that was a way to kind of distinguish the text that was being sung. If they really wanted something to cut through and be very clearly understood, they would make it monophonic, because then that would kind of burst out of that polyphonic texture, and it would really catch the ear, and you would notice, oh, all that florid stuff isn't happening anymore. This must be important. So that was a way to kind of capture the listener's attention. Now remember, if you were a common person sitting in the pew at Mass, you probably didn't understand what they were singing anyway, because they were singing in Latin. And unless you knew Latin, that might not mean that much to you. You could hear the beauty of the music, you could hear the movement of the music. You could probably tell that they were singing just one syllable for a long period of time with lots of notes, but you might not necessarily understand the text and in all of its essence and nuance. Not all religious communities were excited about polyphony. Some saw it as a distraction from plain chant. They thought, frankly, that it was not appropriate for religious setting and for the Mass. But eventually it's going to catch on, you know. Everything that's new faces some pushback in the beginning, and then it kind of catches on and is okay after a while. So the beginnings of polyphony, this Notre Dame school, was not embraced universally. Now the French are known for kind of doing their own thing anyway. So the church in France, if anybody was going to start something new, it would be the church in France, because that's just kind of what the French do. And Rome was not super happy about this. The Vatican was not super happy about this in the beginning, but eventually they came around to it and got on board. Sometimes many churches would only let you use polyphony at really special times like Easter. And for the common everyday Mass, it wasn't they didn't consider it appropriate. But eventually it's going to be used in every Mass, every day, all the time. So let's hear, we're going to use this playlist resource to hear this, because I really like the way it shows you what's going on. So this is Gaude Maria Virgo. Remember, it's going to open with a very melismatic passage. You can see it here. All of these notes are on the first syllable of the Gaude. That's a lot of notes. And then eventually we'll catch up to the unison section. So let's take a listen. You hear that lower voice hasn't moved from that note. That's the peanut butter that holds the sandwich together. It establishes originality, and the harmonies can be around that tonic note. Here's the unison section. So you can hear how after all of that polyphonic movement and all of that long melodramatic passage, how when the unison comes in, it's very striking and it really catches your attention and your ear. That was on purpose. So this was from the Notre Dame School. We think it's Paratine, but we don't know for sure. And it's an example of organum, Organum, which was the first kind of polyphonic music allowed in the Catholic Church in the worship setting. And this is the same thing we just listened to in a different form. So let's talk about secular music in the Middle Ages. Secular music was very much a preservation of stories and history, and this is still true today. We preserve a lot of our history, a lot of our cultural identity, and a lot of cultural happenings by setting them into song. If you know the song American Pie, that's not actually about pie, of course. That's about the day that a plane crashed carrying some really big rock and roll stars, some up and coming rock and roll stars of the day, and they were killed in this plane crash. And that was called the day the music died, because none of them survived that, and their careers were ended instantly. It was a big shock to the American psyche that these young men who were just really kind of beginning to make a big name for themselves in the rock and roll industry were gone in a flash. And when Don McLean wrote that song, now we have that history kind of preserved. And when we think about the day the music died, that helps us keep that in mind. So the same has always been true. Troubadours were wandering minstrel kind of guys who went from town to town, and they would let's say that you're a troubadour here in our area and you're based in Fredericktown. If you sing too many satirical songs about the king in Fredericktown, he's going to get upset with you and you need to split. So you're probably going to go north and go to Farmington, and you're going to sing your songs in Farmington, and that's great until the king finds out, hey, Curtis, that troubadour, he's in Farmington now. Let's go cut off his head. Okay, well, let's go to Bonne Terre. So troubadours kept on the move. Troubadours were European. Trouvères are the French version of that. And they performed secular music for entertainment and in the court. Song texts focused on idealized love and the values of chivalry, which was a code of behavior idealized by knights and members of royal courts. Songs were usually sung monophonically and played with improvised instrumental accompaniment, something that was easy to carry with you. Lutes were a very popular instrument at this time. because you could carry those easily with you from time to time. They were also responsible for playing and singing a lot of dance music because everybody liked to dance. You've probably experienced the direct impact of a singer telling an emotional story with a simple melody and an unobtrusive instrumental accompaniment. Again, American Pie comes to mind. It's a common Western musical image. The singer-songwriter, Paul Simon on stage with his guitar. James Taylor. It's not surprising then that the earliest written records we have of secular music are by poet musicians. They would write the words, they would write the music, but they just didn't write it down. They didn't write it down and preserve it because that wasn't in their wheelhouse. Here's a picture of a German court. You see the musicians here hanging out, entertaining the king. Hopefully he likes what they're doing. I also see a sword right here. So, play well, sing well. So we have on the sacred side of things, we have the cathedrals and the choir schools teaching the very formal art of reading and writing hymns, interpreting those and singing them. Not a lot of instrumental music in the church at this time, mostly a cappella. And then on the sacred side, we have more instrumental music. And it was in the language of the country. It would not be in Latin. If you were in France, you're going to sing in French. If you're in Germany, you're going to sing in German, because you're singing for people who don't necessarily speak Latin in their everyday work and lives. They did write, it says here that they did write down their songs, but we don't have a lot of examples of that because the church preserved those. Remember our big book of Organum that Leonie put together. There was not a troubadour or a trouvère who could carry around a book like that from town to town. That's going to be really cumbersome and difficult. So those kind of things didn't get preserved for us. They were preserved for them, or they passed their music from ear to ear, like playing the telephone game. Even members of the aristocracy were like to play and participate in secular music. King Richard the Lionheart of England was known to be a pretty good musician and a poet musician. And let's face it, they had time to practice, right? If you're a serf and you're one of the folks that work in the fields from sun up to sundown, you don't have time to practice an instrument and learn how to do that. You have to have leisure time available to you to become a musician. You just do. And that's still kind of true today. If you don't have time to practice, you don't really become a very accomplished musician. So singer-songwriter traditions accompanied dancing and banquets. They were the after-dinner entertainment in the courts. It was part of ceremonies and tournaments and civic processions. Everywhere we have music today, they had music there too, at the same time and all the same places. Poems arranged from simple love ballads and love songs to political and moral tales, war songs, chronicles of the Crusades, laments, and of course dance songs. You always have to have some dance music in your repertoire. Many of the lyrics described an unrequited love or an unconsummated passionate love that was called courtly love, where you loved the woman from afar, but you never even probably spoke to her because she was so high above you in station and rank that you could love her, but you could never hope to be her equal and to actually have a relationship with her. It was very idealized. There were women who were poet musicians and who express a female point of view in the things that they wrote. Again, we just don't have that many examples written down. So, I'm gonna butcher this name because I'm not good with French and Spanish. Rainbow de Valoquer. Close enough. Typifies the tradition of the courtly troubadour, that courtly love, idealized love. One of his works, Calinda Maya, the 1st of May, is the most famous. This is a love song to a noble lady, specifically Beatrice, who was daughter of his patron. And the text celebrates the return of spring and also confirms his pledge of honor, love, and service to the lady. So this is a good time to listen to this, even though it's really cold outside. Yesterday was the first day of spring. So, the lines of the poem are irregular in length. So some of the phrases will be longer or shorter, depending on, what he wrote, poetically. It compares his devotion to that of other well-known lovers in epic poems, and that happens a lot. Think of Taylor Swift and her song about Romeo and Juliet. It's kind of got the details wrong, but it's the same idea. And at the end, he identifies the work as an estampe, which is a dance form. You can dance to it, but it also has words. The melody is in 3 sections, each of which is repeated, so the overall form is strophic, where you have the same melody repeated over and over with every stanza. Notice how the tune is balanced by phrases ringing upward at the beginning and downward at the closing. So on the recording, we're going to hear the dance version first with a rebec, which is an early example of the violin. It says see page 30. So I'm assuming there is a picture there. Accompanied by a pipe, which is a 3-hole end-blown flute, and a guitarra moresca, which is a stringed instrument, a forerunner of our modern guitar, and small drums known as nakers. Not only the instruments, but the improvisational style and structure of this song are very much like Middle Eastern music. Remember, the Crusades hadn't been all that long ago in this time period, and we'd spent a lot of time in the Middle East, so we had been very much influenced by Middle Eastern music in what was going on musically in secular music here in the Western world. Okay, so here is the recording of this, and again, I'm going to use this one because I really like how it lays stuff out for you. So we're going to start with the rebec in the A section. You can hear the guitar press there. It sounds a little higher and tinnier than our modern guitars. And then you hear the drums come in. They use the first stanza. It's got a beat, you can dance to it. So we already kind of touched on how the Crusades influenced music of this time. You can really hear the influence in that. So according to the biography of this composer, he came from he was the son of a poor knight from Provence, which is in southern France. Southern France is very far from Spain. As a young man, he entered the service of Marquis Boniface I, whose court was in northwestern Italy. This happened a lot. You had to travel to another place to kind of do your thing. And again, you know, if you want to be, say, an oceanographer, you're probably not going to do that in Southeast Missouri. You know, we don't have an ocean. So if you wanted to be a court musician and you were in a place where there wasn't a court and you're going to have to travel. He was knighted for saving the life of his patron in a battle in Sicily. And when his patron set off for the Fourth Crusade, the composer did not go with him, but he later joined the forces in Constantinople, where he wrote a famous epic describing the colorful events. So right there we've got a song preserving history, right? He's going to write an epic describing the colorful events. It's likely that he was killed in battle there along with his patron. 35 poems by this composer survive, and 7 preserve the music as well. And again, this is what we just listened to in a slightly different format. So let's talk about my show. So let's listen to a chanson, which is a song, that's French for song, to the medieval chanson, ma fin est mon commencement. My end is my beginning. So you can hear that it's very melismatic. And we're gonna listen to the whole 5 minutes. Okay, there's a good stopping spot right there. So you can hear similarities to the organ that we heard before. You kind of hear that drone quality in the lowest voice, and then the upper voice is being very, very fluid and florid and really being very melismatic. But this is not organ. This is chanson. It's polyphonic, but it's secular. The sacred polyphony, the development of organum, is going to spill over into secular music. Guillaume de Machaut was a poet composer from the French Ars Nova. Ars Nova meaning new art. Nova meaning new, ars being art, new art. Who wrote both secular and sacred music, set to fixed text forms, which were dance forms. The rondo, the ballade, the virelai, those are dance forms. Michaud's chanson that we just listened to employs a palindromic form and an enigmatic text to display compositional craft and challenge the listener to careful listening and thinking. It's a puzzle. If you look right here, able was I ere I saw the Elbe. Do you see the puzzle there? Read it backwards. Able was I ere I saw Elbe. It's palindrome. If you look at the very last day of this year, it will be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's puzzle. And the medieval mind liked that kind of thing. They like to take that apart and try to find the puzzles and the twists and the turns. The Sphinx's riddle. Cryptography, the Da Vinci Code. We are fascinated by riddles and puzzles. We like them. That's why the Rubik's Cube was so popular for a while, and it appears to be making a comeback. I see kids with Rubik's Cubes at school now all the time. Here's the riddle of the Sphinx. Which creature walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening? Do you know the answer? The answer is a man. They walk on 4 legs in the morning, meaning the beginning of your life when you're learning to crawl. 2 legs in the afternoon when you're young, when you're in the prime of your life and able-bodied, and then 3 legs in the evening when you have to use a cane to help you get around when you're old. Music has long been linked with mathematics and geometry since the ancient Greeks. Pythagoras was known for his musical experiments. He's the guy, he took a string and he shortened it and lengthened it to see what would happen when you plucked it. He's the one that figured out how long it might be to get the interval of an octave. The 4 topics considered essential to education were music, math, geometry, and astronomy. And those were the 4 cornerstones of what was a good education, a good solid university education in the Middle Ages. Since then, musicians have remained involved in exploring mathematical and geometrical implications of the art and conveying puzzles through sound. The courtly love song tradition of the troubadours and trouvères continued into the early 1300s. And while some of these songs remained monophonic, polyphonic developments in sacred music like organum and motet, which we'll talk about in a little while, soon carried over to the secular realm. And we hear that in Guillaume de Michaux. He is a bridge between the secular trouvère tradition and a new creative sensibility. The Ars Nova, which appeared in the early 1300s in France and afterwards in Italy, was a new musical style. It was more refined and complex than the music that had come before it, which was the Ars Antiqua, the old art. And it ushered in new ideas in rhythm and meter and harmony and in counterpoint. Counterpoint is when you have 2 polyphonic lines that kind of move against each other. At the same time, writers such as Petrarch and Boccaccio and Chaucer were turning from otherworldly ideas to human subjects. They were writing about people. Chaucer is a very good example of this. His Canterbury Tales is a collection of stories that are told by a group of travelers as they go on a pilgrimage. You couldn't just open up Netflix and watch it on Wi-Fi while you're traveling at that time. You needed something to pass the time. So telling stories was a good way to do that. Painters began rediscovering the beauty of nature and the attractiveness of the human form. So we're going to begin to see more paintings that focus on people rather than on pastoral scenes. There will be people in the paintings. Similarly, French composers like Michaud started to turn from religious music to the more secular, but they used more refined ways of composing and knitting things together. So it wasn't quite as slapdash and freewheeling as the troubadours and trouvères had done it. The influence of this last great poet composer was very far-reaching, and his music and poetry was admired long after he died. He was also the first composer to self-consciously collect his work and leave them for posterity. Now remember, before this, we didn't have a lot of examples of secular music. Now we're going to have quite a few because Michaud wanted to be sure that he hung on to his stuff and he preserved it. So it could carry on post his demise. In his secular works, he favored the chanson, which is a French monophonic or polyphonic song. And chansons are secular in nature. And he liked the poetic forms of the rondo, the ballade, and the virelai. So we're going to listen to a rondo by Michaud, which presents us with an enigmatic text and a hidden musical structure involving palindromes, words, and phrases that read the same forward and backward. So his text is, my end is my beginning and my beginning is my end, which makes a lot of sense when you think about palindromes, right? Abel was I ere I saw Elba. My end is my beginning and my beginning is my end. It's a sentiment also found in several biblical passages, like Ecclesiastes. The thing that hath been is that shall be, is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. There is nothing new under the sun. To everything turn, turn, turn. There's a season. 2 centuries later, for example, Mary Queen of Scots would spend hours embroidering in French, in my end is my beginning, when she was imprisoned by Elizabeth I. Lots of court intrigue there. So as we examine the puzzles that Michaud is setting in his chanson, we need to consider that the purpose is not just to amuse, but it also carries a religious connotation, even though the song itself is secular. Michaud was the foremost poet composer of the Ars Nova. He took holy orders at an early age, but worked most of his life at various French courts, including that of Charles, the Duke of Normandy, who subsequently became the King of France. Michaud's double career as cleric and courtier inspired him to write both religious and state and secular music. So he kind of had a foot in both camps there. One of his writings is a long autobiographical poem of more than 9,000 lines in rhymed couplets, and it tells the platonic love story of the aging Michaud and a young girl named Perrault. The two exchanged poems and letters, some of which the composer set to music. Michaud spent his final years as a priest and canon in the Cathedral of Reims, and was one of the greatest and most admired musicians and poets of his day. Michaud was familiar with the famous octagonal labyrinth or maze built into the floor of the church at Reims. Here's a picture of that. Kind of looks like a maze. And on holy days like Easter, there was a procession that would kind of walk through this maze. And it was a symbol of Christ's path through hell and to resurrection. The Catholic tradition says that after Jesus was crucified, he descended into hell before he rose on Easter. And he was descended into hell to comfort those who were in hell. And then after he was resurrected, he ascended into heaven. So if you look at this and you think about my end is my beginning, it kind of begins to make some sense. Similarly, similar elements of balance and symmetry can be found in other works too. And it's a forerunner, it's a foreshadowing of what we're going to hear when we get to the classical period, where balance was everything. to Haydn and Mozart, early Mozart, balance was everything. If you had an A at the beginning, you had to have an A at the end, everything had to line up. And this is where that begins. So let's listen to My End Is My Beginning. So we're gonna hear independent voices with melismatic melodies in the first half of the refrain. And the harmonies created by the three melodies are consonant. The section ends with longer notes and all voices singing the same syllable. That's a cadence, an ending spot. It sounds kind of open and hollow. There's B. And my beginning is my end. So he's taken the melody earlier and he's flipped it around, which is called retrograde. You go backwards. This idea of retrograde, of singing the melody forward and then backward, is going to come back again in the 20th century with 12-tone music. So there really is nothing new under the sun, what Ecclesiastes said. It always comes back again. So that was, we're talking about a separation of 500 years or so, but it's still useful. We have the same musical idea, but the words are different. I know it's hard to tell that. So this is like the second half of the refrain. My end is my beginning. And Rochelle was a priest, but here he's writing in French, not in Latin, because it's not sacred in character. Now we have the refrain, comes back again. So the end truly is the beginning, and the beginning the end, as the same material from before. And again, this is what we just heard in a different form. Okay, so we're gonna cover the madrigal, and that's where we will end tonight. So. Fair Phyllis is an example of an English madrigal. Let's hear just a bit of Fair Phyllis. It's cheerful, it's bouncy, and the advantage is it's in English, so we can understand what's going on there. Both professional and amateur music making expanded in the Renaissance through secular vocal and instrumental genres. Jacques Arcadelt was an early master of the Italian madrigal, which is a 16th century tradition that linked music and lyric poetry. Madrigals usually feature expressive text setting, word painting, and multiple meanings. English madrigals, such as those by John Farmer, one of which we just heard, were often simpler and lighter in style than Italian madrigals. When friends got together, singing was probably going to be part of the evening's entertainment. If you were an educated person, you were expected to either be able to read music and sing it at sight, or read music and play an instrument at sight. And when you went to your friend's house for dinner, afterwards you didn't go in and play Xbox. Everybody would gather around, and they would sing and play for entertainment. It was very much a social experience. Now remember, we have the printing press now, so you can have printed music that you can either, where everyone can have their own part to look at, or you had this really big book that everyone gathered around together and you sang, all reading off the same copy. Those were very large and expensive. In more prosperous homes, you could probably find a lute, which is an early forerunner of the guitar, or some kind of keyboard instrument, a small organ or a clavichord. The study of music was considered part of the proper upbringing for a young girl, or to a lesser degree, a young man. Partly as a result, women began to play a more prominent role in the performance of music in the home and in the court. During the later 16th century in Italy, a number of professional women singers would achieve great fame, especially as opera became more popular. Two important secular genres arose during this time: the French chanson, which was monophonic or polyphonic. Remember, we dealt with courtly love and popular poetry, and the Italian madrigal. A madrigal is a Renaissance secular work for voices, with or without instruments, and it's set to a short lyric love poem. These were also popular in England. Italian madrigals, of course, are sung in Italian, and English madrigals are going to be sung in English. The madrigal is known for its expressive device of word painting, which you remember from our vocabulary list. Word painting is making the music sound like the words say it should sound. If in that example we just heard in Fair Phyllis, they were singing about her going up and down, over hill and dale, while she is being pursued by this young man who is in love with her, and you could hear the up and down in the voices. Another example, if you hear harsh dissonance, it might coincide with a word like death, or an ascending line might say heaven or stars. You see how these so-called madrigalisms enhance the emotional content of music. We all know the word madrigal now because of Il Canto, but madrigal basically means song. The madrigal links poetry and music in a way that's a little bit new, a little bit old. We've had secular song now based on poetry for a while, but these are going to be polyphonic in nature. They dealt with emotional content, weeping, sighing, trembling, dying, which the Italian madrigalists would set very suggestively. Love and unsatisfied desire were very popular topics, but so were humor and satire, politics, scenes of city and country life. Madrigal literature presents a vivid panorama of the Renaissance thought and feeling. From the beginning, the Italian madrigal was an art form in which words and music were clearly linked. During its early period, the composer's chief concern was to give pleasure to amateur performers. The final phase of the madrigal is going to extend into the late Renaissance and the early Baroque. So let's talk about Claudio Monteverdi. Monteverdi is a Renaissance composer, born in Italy. His name means Claude Greenberg. Claude Greenberg. Monteverdi began publishing his music while he was still a very young man, and then he became the court composer to the Duke of Mantua. And that's where he wrote what we consider the first ever true opera, Orfeo, which was based on the Greek myth of Orpheus. Orpheus's lover Eurydice is taken to the underworld, and he tries to go and rescue her. And Orpheus is a talented musician. So he uses the power of his music to lull the king of the underworld to sleep, so that he can try to sneak Eurydice out. But the deal is that she can't look at him. If she looks at him, then the deal's off. And just before they reach the surface, she turns and looks at him, and she's lost to him forever. And so it's very tragic, as many operas tend to be. Eventually, he was the choir master at St. Mark's in Venice, which was a very important position. And Monteverdi wrote madrigals throughout his lifetime, publishing 9 books that transformed the genre from polyphonic part music to an emotionally charged soloistic style that highlighted the text through unprepared dissonances and speech-like melodies. In other words, he came up with some new and cool stuff. He thought that rhetoric should govern music, not be its servant. In other words, the words should drive what the music does, not the other way around. So, Sicchio Morire speaks, this is the peak of the Italian madrigal tradition. Remember that he felt the words should follow, the words should drive what the music does, rather than worrying about all the rules of harmony and counterpoint. Madrigals were sung as chamber music with one singer per line, reading from a part book. So if we were going to sing a madrigal, I would have a part book, and Chloe would have a part book, and Kira would have a part book, and Curtis would have a part book, and then we would all have different music in our part book. You know, maybe Chloe would have the soprano part book, and Kira would have the alto part book, Curtis would have the bass part book, and I would have the tenor part book. If I'm not able to sing in that range, if it's too low for me, I can play that part on my lute, and it will still work out okay. So they were somewhat interchangeable between whether it was instrumental or whether it was to be sung. So let's listen to this madrigal. So you can see from the very opening line, truly, I want to die. So it's, we're talking about some really emotional stuff here. So here's it's beautiful. So all the lines are descending because the singer is laying upon the chest of his lover. So when you look at that title, you think it's going to be sad and it's going to be, you know, an oh poor me, but it's not an oh poor me. It's an I love you so much that I could just die because being near you, kissing you, touching you is just so emotional that I can't handle it. You can really hear a difference between that and the organum that we listened to at the beginning of class tonight. We've come a long way from having that droning quality in the lower voice and it not really getting to move much and do much at all. And now the lower voice gets just as much to do as the upper voices, and everyone's part is interesting and everyone's part is enjoyable to sing. So the madrigal in England really developed into its own during the time of Elizabeth I. A lot of important things happened during the time of Elizabeth I. Shakespeare was writing during the time of Elizabeth I. And it was a time of innovation in the arts. Elizabeth was known for enjoying music and for enjoying theater. And if the Queen says, you know, write me something snappy, you write the Queen something snappy. Ancient composers followed the Italian model, setting dramatic poems, weighty works, but then they're going to also set some things that are humorous, lighter, more fun, in character and in subject matter. One of the most important English madrigal composers was John Farmer. John Farmer was active in Dublin, Ireland as an organist and master of the choir boys at Christ Church. And then in 1599, he moved to London and published his only collection of 4-voice madrigals. Farmer used clever word painting in these lighthearted works and helped shape the madrigal into a truly native, that being English, art form. So we listened to Fair Phyllis earlier, but we're going to hear it again with some notations. Fair Phyllis tells the story of a shepherdess, Phyllis, who's being pursued by her lover, Amantis. Their names are stock for rustic characters. Probably no one in England is actually named Amantis. But she's being pursued by her lover across to the hills and valleys. She kind of leaves her sheep because he's chasing her around, trying to get a kiss. And it brings their story to a happy conclusion as they fall to kissing. You can hear the charming story in the word painting. You can hear the up and down. You can hear when they fall to kissing, things become more homophonic and not quite as florid. So let's hear Fair Phyllis again with some notations. So here is the opening statement. Fair Phyllis I saw sitting all alone, and only one voice sings that because Fair Phyllis is sitting all alone. They're right there, that right off the bat we have some word painting there. And then all 4 voices are going to kind of echo that. So we open with monophony, and then it opens up to homorhythm in all 4 voices. It's quick and lively and charming. Hear the up and down. Down is traded between voices. It's light, it's fun, there's nothing serious about this song. Except maybe her sheep wandered off. Okay, so that brings us to madrigals for modern ears. Another manner of magical performance in the Renaissance era was solo song with instrumental accompaniment. Often the accompaniment was provided by a lute. Here is a sample work from Dowland's first book of songs or airs that shows the table book. So notice that this one is printed where it looks right to us, but then this one is upside down. And then this one is kind of sideways, and this one is right side up, but it's over here. That's so I can stand here, and Curtis can stand here, and Kira can stand here so she can read this, and then Chloe can stand here. And we can all read our part off the same music, but not be right on top of each other and have some elbow room. The Dowland's first book of songs and airs was a highly successful publication of music for the home. So remember, these kind of things could be published by means of the printing press, and that made them more affordable. They didn't have to be written by hand. They could be pressed, and that made the books more affordable. So middle class homes could afford to have something like that. This is John Dowland and his lute. You can see the similarities to our modern guitar, but you can also see the differences. Lots more strings on a lute. These are, it's kind of like a 12-string guitar in some ways, because these strings would double. You could tune them independently though, so you could get more notes on the lute. The instrumentalist, the rock musician Sting, has a particularly devoted following for works like Dowland's, and he plays the lute. Sting recorded "Can She Excuse My Wrongs," which is a Dowland composition, and he played it on lute. Here's Sting's lute. Still these extra strings. I find it fascinating. This is a modern lute. Lutes like Dowland's, you'll see them in museums, but they're not playable anymore. So this is a modern lute. This picture is from 2007, which I know seems like a long time ago now, but really wasn't that long ago. So let's hear a bit of "Can She Excuse My Wrongs." This is written by John Dowland, performed by Sting. Yeah, if you want to hear the rest, you gotta get on Spotify or YouTube. But he's not the only one who is kind of going back into the past and bringing things forward. Bruce Springsteen recently recorded, I guess not all that recently now, been at least 10 years, a bunch of folk songs and songs written by Pete Seeger. Hopefully we'll get that far before we run out of semester this year. But musicians like to look to the past to inform the present. And if you were going to be a musician in Mozart's time, you didn't go to the music store and buy yourself a John Schaum book to study piano. You studied the work of Bach. Bach also taught you how to structure your music as you were writing it. He was considered the textbook. So that we have a long history of going to the past to teach us what to do, and then we take those rules and we bend and we break them. So that's not really surprising. We're going to stop before we go to the motet. So here's what you need to do in your digital resources. You're going to go to Inquisitive. And tonight we did chapters 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Now I know that looks like a lot, but all these are fairly short. So you should do these inquisitives for chapters 15 through 19. If it's ever gonna open. Okay, we'll do a little bit together. Okay, so, oh no, you don't want to do 15. That was last week. Hang on. Start with 16. My bad. Okay. Okay. So if you need to listen to it again, this is the Gaude where we started class tonight. We get that drone sound at the bottom. And the other two voices moving melismatically over the top of it. Okay, so the texture of the Gaude Maria Virgo is 3-part, 2-part homophonic, monophonic. It is 3-part polyphony, followed by monophonic chant, because remember then you have that monophonic section. What describes the relationship among the voices in the Gaude Maria Virgo? Is it one voice sings a melody and the other two sing harmony? Is it 2 voices sing different melodies while a third voice sings mostly on one lower pitch? Or all voices sing one melody? It's this, right? Because we have that lower voice that's drumming. Okay, remember, if you feel more or less confident about it, you can change your point value. Okay, so I'm gonna go back. You should do 16, 17, 18, and 19, because this is where we ended today. So we've moved out of the Middle Ages, and with Michaud, we begin to move into the Renaissance. So now that we're in talking about madrigals and chanson and English madrigal, now we're talking about Renaissance music, which is a whole much more polyphonic in nature and much more secular than sacred. You have a lot more examples preserved of secular music in the Renaissance. So those will be due for next week. Okay. As always, if you have questions or things you're not sure about, shoot me an email. Those of you listening on a recording, tonight's keyword is retrograde, which means to go backwards. We did that in the end is my beginning. So be sure and when you send me that code word, please put tonight's date in the subject matter, in the subject line of the email, and that way it won't get lost in the shuffle of emails. I cleared out about 500 emails today because they just come. So it's easy for your email to get lost if you don't give me a subject matter that catches my eye. So please use today's date, which is March 21st, as your subject matter, and send me that code word retrograde. Okay, so we will pick it up with chapter 20 and go through the rest of the Renaissance next time. All right, if there are any questions, let me know. And if not, I will see you next week.